Good morning and welcome to the much anticipated NDACo Legislative Wrap-Up Report webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alicia Adolph and I'm the Professional Development Manager for the Association of Counties. And today you'll earn 2 ILG training hours and attention for any state's attorneys attending today. This webinar is approved for 2 CLE credits. Like always, you have that chat box. You can type your comments and questions, and we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation today. And at the end of this live webinar, a quick evaluation is going to pop up on your screen. If you can give us your feedback, let us know of any additional training that you would like to see, or if you have any more questions in regards to the presentation today too, we'd love to hear that. So we appreciate your feedback. So presenting today, we have your North Dakota Association of Counties legislative team. And to kick off the webinar and introduce your team county, I'm going to now turn it over to Executive Director, Aaron Burst. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Alicia, and good morning, all of the county members out there. Glad to have you joining us, and for those that are going to listen to the recorded, I'm glad you took time out of all of your busy schedules to listen to a little bit of what happened over the last 4 months. Today, you're going to be hearing from Danelle Presky, Linda Swyhovic, Jenny Dietzman, and Mary Korsmo. And we have some specific slides, and we try to get an expertise on all the topics. But as you know, North Dakota Association of Counties handles so many bills when it comes to the legislative session, and ultimately it becomes a huge team effort. I can't be more proud of the effort and the people that we have working for the Association of Counties. And even though Danelle, Linda, and Jenny and Mary will be the ones talking to you today, it's more of a team effort, and it's the entire association, whether it's Kathy in the office who's making copies for us, or Jason giving us technical expertise on the 911 system. It really is a team effort here at the association to give you the best service possible. Also, no matter how good we are at the association, we couldn't do anything if it wasn't for all of you, the members, who are engaging on your local basis with your legislators. I know I saw social service directors up here almost every day, and they had a huge load to cover. Sheriffs, auditors, treasurers, county commissioners, and even if you didn't come up to the Capitol, I know numerous ones of you were reaching out to your local legislator. And without you, it doesn't matter anything, because what they really want to hear from is all of you back in their home districts. So thank you to the membership. I also do need to give a shout out to our fellow political subdivisions. This is my 10th legislative session, and I've never seen as good of a cooperative effort with political subdivisions, whether it's cities, townships, schools. All of those subdivisions were working together closely, and we didn't always agree on every policy issue, but at least we were at the table with each other, having dialogue and trying to work through any differences. But I'm happy to report 95% of what comes into the legislative session, the political subdivisions have a common interest to make sure that we are heard from. So again, Matt at the cities, Larry at the townships, Amy over at the schools. We got together every Thursday and kind of coordinated schedules, and without them, we wouldn't have been as successful as we are. And then finally, the other shout out is partners that you wouldn't necessarily think of, non-government partners. Russ Hansen at the AGC was extremely helpful when it came to road funding. Eric Spencer over at the Greater Chamber always kept an eye on good tax policy and helped us work through that with the business community. So again, without all of those partners, we couldn't have got through this legislative session. So a shout out to all of them and the staff here at the association. So as all of you know, the Constitution requires the legislature to meet every other year. They can meet no more than 80 days. In this time, they met 74 days. Which is a little bit suspect, because they were meeting some days, but if they don't go on to the floor, that's not counted as a legislative day. So although 74 days were used, that means they have 6 days that they could come back at any time and meet for those following 6 days. It was actually a much longer slog than 74 days. If you haven't been up to the legislative session First, I encourage you to do it because it's just educational, but it is an intense time. It is 4 months of very little sleep. Everybody up there, all the legislators are tired. And at the end of the session, it generally shows where everybody gets a little cranky, which is okay. But for the vast majority of legislators and lobbyists that are up there and state officials, it's just digging in and being professional and trying to get to the right answer in a stressful environment. This is just a summary of the bills that we had. There was almost 1,100 bills introduced, and again, that is one of the higher ones in recent memory. Back in the early days, there were more, but this is quite a heavy lift. And of course, as all of you know, the association or county government in general, I should say, tracks 1,600 or around 600 bills. And as you know, the counties touch so many things. Since we run the property tax system for even the other political subdivisions, we have to be involved in every tax bill that has property tax, maybe sales tax. We have to be involved in criminal justice. We have to be involved in human services. There are just so many bills that run through the Capitol that directly impact county government. So it is a heavy load. I'm confident that our staff is able to keep on track. And again, I hope you are following the legislative blog. That is one of the strong points. I have many lobbyists that come up to me and say, we follow your blog to get information on bills that we are tracking. So very proud of the work we do. We did, going into the session, just to give everybody a little structural background on how we select so our priorities. As you know, in the fall of the year, we have our annual conference. At the annual conference, we pass resolutions that is important to the membership. Those resolutions get translated into bills. And then ultimately, we have the County Commissioners Association get together every Friday and go over the bills and see what falls in line and what doesn't. In addition to the County Commissioners Association, there are reps from the regions to discuss some of those bills. This, again, is a large budget bill. Again, this is a biennium, but $20.3 billion is how much the legislature spent this year. That is a remarkable number when you think of North Dakota is probably 800,000 to 900,000 people. So there is a significant amount of money that is spent. Now, that said, a significant amount of that money, as you will hear, is either tax relief or infrastructure support. So we're very thankful for our legislators. And again, even though sometimes it gets a little stressful and you might get mad at legislators, almost every legislator is there to do the right thing for their communities, and they are nobody is an expert on everything. So they're all just trying to get to the right answer. And I very much appreciate the legislative leadership and those that serve, because it really is a thankless job. I can't imagine being away from my family for 4 months and you're not doing it for the pay. So they do need a shout out, even if they can get annoying sometimes. My kind of 30,000 foot recap of the legislative session. Again, this is my 10th one. It was every session has a unique stamp, of course. This one to me was much different than the other ones, and maybe a little bit more awkward or not as enjoyable as the other ones. On the unfortunate side, we had our first legislator pass away during the session, Representative Josh Christie, a Fargo legislator, a young guy too. I consider that young because I think he was 42. And he passed away during the session. That's devastating, of course. He has a family, a young family. We also had a legislator a couple of weeks from the end of the session have a blood clot in his brain and could no longer finish the session out. And I'm happy to report just recently he was able to be moved back down to Fargo, his home community. But those kind of things put a reminder on, you might debate public policy and you might disagree or agree with those legislators, but we're all human beings. And so that kind of hit hard. And then, of course, the whole gross stuff that we saw with the unfortunate and criminal conduct of a former legislator, it just added to a sense of a real frustration and disappointment, and on a personal level. On a professional level, I thought county government, nobody comes out of a legislative session feeling great, where everything goes their way. I don't care what industry or what profession you're in, everybody gets beat up when it comes to a legislative session. That said, I think county government came out fairly well. We'll talk about some of the losses that I feel I'm disappointed in, but there were a lot more wins than we had losses. Another thing that's I always need to highlight to the membership is this presentation is 99% built on what bills passed and what you need to do to implement them. There's a lot of successes that we had on the county side of killing bills that were devastating to county government. And it's kind of hard to message that because those bills actually take a lot of work and a lot of effort, and you get beat up for getting in the way of some bills sometimes. But there were a ton of bills that just were devastating to county government, and we were successful getting those killed. So we won't spend too much time on those. But again, it's more than just what passed. So going on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about, of course, property tax. And there, going into the legislative session, we had a number of bills. In fact, we had 60 bills because everybody had their own idea what property tax reform and relief should look like. As you remember, this fall we had the ballot measure to eliminate property tax. That went down by 60 to 30%. So the citizens didn't think that getting rid of, totally eliminating property tax was the right idea. But everybody coming out of Measure 4 felt that property tax is going to be the big talker. And that is where we had to really dive in. And legislators felt that, okay, eliminating property tax was not the right idea, but there are other things we could do to either lessen the burden or reform how we do property tax structure. As all of you know, property tax is essential. That is the #1 lifeline that we have for dollars coming in to provide services. I said this during the Measure 4 debate. If anybody says they 100% know what the best taxing mechanism is for services, I've got a bridge to sell you, because nobody really knows what the best system is for funding government. There's pros and cons for every type of tax system. If you tax consumption, you could say that then negatively impacts people buying services. If you do property, you say that negatively impacts you because you might have a stagnant property, but yet have to still pay on it. So again, there is no magic bullet when it comes to any type of tax. And that's why we generally have always favored broad-based taxes across the board on different things. So everybody has a little pain, everybody has a little relief, but ultimately getting rid of property tax completely without trying to find some other solutions is very difficult. Now, that said, there were a number of bills that tried to get to restructure how we create property tax. And again, most of them had flaws. There were a number of bills that we'll talk about here coming up with Linda that would change the way you value property. And again, there's pros and cons on that. If you value based on square footage, you might have a square footage house that's in an older neighborhood and dilapidated that pays the same, that's in a higher neighborhood, but it's the same square footage. That creates inequities. So again, there is no magic bullet. But at the end of the day, you can see we went from about 60 bills that were targeting property tax relief and reform to ultimately one bill that is the vast majority of where our property tax relief and reform is. The Association of Counties has always been supportive of property tax relief. So we supported numerous bills when it came to giving money back to the citizens, whether it was through the primary residence credit, as we'll talk about further, whether it was from buying down mills. we always supported getting money back to individuals to make sure that they're getting some of the benefit of, quite frankly, the excess revenues that are coming into the state, which is primarily driven by the commodities and oil in particular. The legislature has built much of this $20 billion through the oil industry. And so again, without oil, we wouldn't even be able to have these conversations of property tax relief. So again, a shout out to the industry. And I know there's always pros and cons with every industry, but the oil industry, from the fiscal standpoint, has been an economic boom to the state. And that is something to keep in mind and appreciate. So with that said, we ultimately ended up with House Bill 1176 and Senate Bill 2201 that kind of helps get some of the other things in 1176 that weren't done well. And I will turn it over now to Linda Swyhovic, who I'm happy to announce is Grandma Swyhovic today, as her son and daughter-in-law entered into this world with a new son. So if she is real fast in her slides, she has a right to be. And so congratulations, Linda, on behalf of the Association of Counties. And we can't wait for little Theodore to become a county commissioner. So Linda, all you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, it's a bit, if I'm a bit distracted this morning, it's because I just found out about an hour ago that I am a grandma for the very first time. So little baby boy, 8 pounds, 5 ounces. Everybody's really good. So what a blessing. So every one of the property tax proposals that Aaron talked about before, the 30 bills that we ended up tracking and following and testifying on, had some component of relief or reform or both. The relief concepts were generally circled around either primary residence credit, like we know today, we've known since the last session. A couple of bills that talked about buying down school mills. We know some of that concept already, as there's a portion of school mills that are already bought down and have been for a number of years. And then a concept that also reduced the property tax rate for all properties. So the percentage that is used to calculate against the mill rate was adjusted down, and the state was going to backfill those dollars. Reform concepts generally circled around two concepts, one being the 3% cap on growth in dollars levied for political subdivisions. There was one version of a cap on total spending, overall budgets in general, the total budget versus the dollars levied, which we did provide testimony noting that we get revenues through grants and even state government revenue sharing programs such as roads, that if we restricted the total overall budget by 3%, we would have a very difficult time adjusting to and spending dollars, those grant kinds of dollars. The other concept was a 3% cap on taxable valuation growth. And although when we looked at that concept, it made sense in some ways as far as ease of calculation and ease of administration. It eventually shifted the property tax burden to, under the concept that came forward in House Bill 1575, eventually over time would have shifted the property tax burden to new properties, because the concept capped growth in value regardless of whether the property was sold for a higher amount. It captured the 2024 values. So the only accurate values regarding tax calculations would have been on brand new properties. And so that, again, eventually over time would have shifted the burden to new properties. And that was a concept that just couldn't get, it had traction off and on through the session. It actually was one of the last bills defeated in the Senate Finance and Tax Committee. But ultimately it had a hard time overcoming the momentum that House Bill 1176, which ultimately passed, had. Next slide, Danelle. So we'll talk a little bit more about what passed in House Bill 1176. It was the big bill that the governor supported. Obviously, we knew that before session even started. That was a concept he supported. It had all the leaders as sponsors on the bill. And so we kind of knew and were told through the whole session, this will be the vehicle, this will be the vehicle. So can't even tell you the amount of hours spent communicating with legislators, meeting with the legislative council to try to understand what they were going to, how it was going to be written, to try to make it the best possible bill we could. But what it ultimately passed as far as relief goes is a $1,600 primary residence credit. So we are at $500 today. On your 2025 tax statement, which will come out in December, you will see a maximum of $1,600 property tax relief. It obviously can't cover more than your liability on a tax bill. So it's the floor is whatever that minimum or whatever your liability is, that's the maximum that it can be. It's also, or the fiscal note on this was a $403 million for this biennium cost to the state using legacy fund earnings. It's effective immediately, so for this tax year. And then it also stipulates that the primary residence credit cannot be used to reduce liability for special assessments, and it cannot exceed the amount due on primary residences. Part of 1176 also included an increase to the renter refund program, which a lot of us aren't maybe super familiar with. It's been in existence for a long, long time. I believe their existing credit for renters was $400. That's increased to $600. It increased the disabled veterans credit from a maximum of $8,100 of taxable value to $9,000. So it mirrors the taxable value increase threshold that the homestead credit program offers. They did not expand, although there was some talk of it, and maybe even originally in this bill in 1176 summit, but ultimately did not expand the homestead tax credit to over current eligibility. And reason being is with that increase to $1,600 of the primary residence credit, many of homestead credit property owners' taxes will be zeroed out between the homestead credit and the $1,600 primary resident credit, which gets applied after the homestead credit. So they didn't feel there was any need to expand that program at this point.
Linda, can I just jump in real quick? Because I'm guessing we'll get some questions on this. I just want to make sure we get this resolved before the questions come. The legislature also applied the residence tax credit to those properties that are in trust. So if mom and dad gave the home over, but they're still living in the home to the trust, ultimately to be taken over by the kids, that is now eligible for those tax credits. So.
Yep.
So that's it. Thank you.
Hey, next slide. Okay, House Bill 1176 limitations. This would be the reform portion of this bill. Again, it's effective for 2025. So as you're looking at budgets for this year, these all apply for this next budget year. So it caps local government dollars levied at 3% of a 3% increase, and it can't be any greater. You're going to run two calculations, which we won't get into a whole lot of detail, but it is based, your cap is based on whatever generates greater dollars, either your base year, which is your highest dollars levied over the last 3 years, increased by 3%, or the adjusted year levy increased by 3%. So two different calculations there. Adjusted year levy is the previous year's levy with adding in new growth and removing any property that is no longer taxable. So you get to make that adjustment. That would be your adjusted year levy. That adjusted year levy also increased by 3%. So you look at the higher of those two, and that is the dollars you are allowed by law. That is your spending limitation. It does not have any effect on your levy limit, on your levy ability. Your levy ability doesn't change at all, and all the current levy limitations still apply. The caps are specifically is your spending authority. Political subdivisions are allowed to carry over any of the unused percentage, and you can use it one time within 5 years. It'll be a rolling 5 years, the oldest year dropping off. It is only allowed to be used one time within that 5 years, and then it drops out of the equation of carry forward. Counties, cities, and schools specifically are allowed to vote to exceed the 3% cap in a general election only, and it's a majority of voters in the general election, and if the majority of the voters in a general election approve that, that is good for 4 years, and you have to, on the ballot, you have to indicate the percentage increase and the proposed dollar amount increase. So that was a lot of discussion that came in and out of the bill. It ranged anywhere from 6 years to 2 years, and ultimately with a lot of conversation behind the scenes, and bringing to the legislators' attention how these big projects generally often are not accomplished in just a 2-year time frame. They landed on the 4-year opt-out length of time. Another thing we had a lot of conversation about is maybe surprisingly, we have a few counties who are at 0 mills in their general fund, and a whole bunch of counties that don't utilize certain levy authorities, so they're considered at 0 mills in those whatever levy authority. And this conversation was to allow, if you are at 0 mill levy authority in any of your levying funds, you are allowed to increase one time without the caps being applied. You are allowed to increase one time to whatever within the levy limitations are allowed to add on those additional mills. Once those mills are in place, after the first year, the 3% will be applied to the dollars that first year generated going forward. Also, additionally, there were a number of exemptions to the cap that we successfully negotiated. Those being taxes levied to pay the principal and interest on any bonded debt or debt obligations. Any taxes levied to pay evidence of indebtedness or certificate of indebtedness issued by the Bank of North Dakota through their infrastructure revolving loan fund. Emergency levies for cities and counties are exempted from the cap. Taxes levied to pay special assessments, any kind of special assessments, whether it's special assessment improvements, or special assessments against a political subdivision. And then taxes levied for water resource districts are also exempt from the cap. Next slide, Danelle. Administration. So some of the administration changes affected by House Bill 1176 is it requires a new property classification. So currently we have residential, commercial, and agricultural. House Bill 1176 creates a 4th property classification known as the primary residential property classification. It is calculated exactly like residential property. It will be included in any reporting to residential property, but it is a step toward eventually, hopefully, eliminating the need for an application for primary residence credit. We're not there yet in our softwares, but the idea being that there would be a way to have that be automated. Another change is the current assessment notice process that happens in March. In March right now, current assessment notices go out to any property owner whose property values have increased by 10% and $3,000. This eliminated those notice and replaced them with a March notice that only includes for every property owner the current and prior year true and full value. And also required on this notice will be the date, time, and location of all local boards of equalization meeting related to that parcel of property. So that's a big change. We're no longer sending notices only to certain property, people who've reached a threshold of increase. We will be sending valuation notices and notices of the local boards of equalization to all property owners for all parcels. We also, the bill also eliminated the estimated notices, which are sent out in August each year. Those are the notices that required preliminary budgets being filed with the county auditor. And those preliminary budgets were used to calculate estimated taxes for every parcel, and those are sent out. Those are eliminated effective this year, effective 2025. We will no longer be sending out estimated tax notices, and it was replaced with a budget hearing notice on the same time frame. So the budget hearing notice will include the date, time, location of all public hearings for each of the taxing districts and where each taxing district budget is available for review. So it implies in that, that is due by political subdivisions have to have that information to the county auditor by August 10th. So that date has stayed the same. It implies as well that preliminary budgets will need to be completed by August 10th. But there's no longer a requirement that political subdivisions provide those approved preliminary budgets to the county auditor. And then that budget hearing notice will be mailed from the county offices no later than August 31st. So again, that budget hearing notice replaces that estimated tax notice, which was eliminated. Also included in 1176 is some changes in what needs to appear on the tax statement. And it requires that the amount of property tax levied as a result of school district bonds issues must be listed separately on the tax statement. Again, we'll be working with software vendors through this interim in the next couple of months to get those identified separately on the tax statement. It also requires that the primary residence credit be provided to taxpayer, provided to the taxpayer on each parcel be identified and called out separately. We're already doing that, so that's not necessarily something new, but now the bill requires it. And it also requires that some statement of showing that the primary residence credit is derived from the legacy fund. In other words, notifying every property taxpayer that their primary residence credit is being paid for from legacy fund earnings dollars. To clarify, because it was back and forth through the session, there's a bullet here that says the primary residence can be applied to voter approved levies. I know there was a lot of discussion about that and between counties, but just as a clarification, voter approved levies are not exempt from the primary residence credit. So that was a big win, because in our current tax systems, there is no mechanism to separate out a payment or a credit from certain levies and not others. So we really had to work hard to ensure that the primary residence credit could be applied to all levies, not exempt out voter approved levies. It also diminished the credit if you'd left off voter approved levies for lower valued properties. And the legislature recognized that wouldn't be good optics, good messaging. People were going to be expecting that $1,600, and if it was reduced for some reason, they would not necessarily have understood that they weren't going to get the full credit. Also in 1176, it created an interim study and the formation of a committee to study the implementation of House Bill 1176 the impact of levy limitations, the feasibility of revising tax statements, and also an analysis of tax exempt property. And I believe that study language was written broadly enough that if there are other things that that committee feels need to be studied, that will be the language allows for some flexibility in that, in what they include in their study during the interim. That also was something that there was an interim study committee similar created in the last session, and I think the legislators that worked on 1176 recognized there was just a whole lot more work to do regarding that. And it also was communicated by us some changes that they were wanting to make that might have been costly, might not have been doable at the county level. Through House Bill 1572, essentially got, because of this study, that bill got killed because they'll take a look at what kinds of changes might be made to the property tax statement, and they'll gather input from counties, which we thought was really important. Next slide, Danelle.
Actually, I'm just going to jump in. I think this bill is really complex, as you can tell from all the details in it. And I mean, Linda and I were pretty much side by side through all these hearings. And while, as Aaron alluded to, the caps weren't ideal, counties really have never supported the cap idea. It was inevitable. The train had left the station. It was going full bore straight through the session, and recognizing that 1176 really had the momentum to be the bill, we put a lot of work behind the scenes into trying to get the most desirable outcome that we could out of this. So we paid a lot of attention to those details outside of the cap, especially in the technical corrections that needed to be made to really make this bill able to be implemented by our counties, and something that would have a desired outcome for our taxpayers as well. And so we sat down, our team sat down with the leadership from both the House and the Senate and the committees, and really worked on amendments and educating them on issues such as that the PRC should be applied to the voter approved levies and why that is needed, and having those conversations and educating them. And as the bill passed through the conference committee, I mean, there's been so many versions of this throughout the session, and as it was passed through the conference committee, it's like stamped in my mind about Linda and I are walking down the hallway, and I turned to her and said, even though it's caps, this is a good success for counties, because it shows that work that we did in making the bill, improving it so that it could provide options for some flexibilities to our counties and other political subs, that work paid off. And it's not shown in testimony. It was shown in all the meetings that we had outside of committee work, and meeting and educating and having those discussions and working on messaging to those direct leaders. So sometimes what you see on camera through listening to the hearings isn't always what's going on. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to try to get the best bill that we can passed. So again, it's frustrating that they felt the need to put caps on local government, but we feel that this bill will has a lot of things in it that will make it workable for counties, and we'll have to come back in 2 years and address what problems that we find along the way.
Yeah, thanks for that, Danelle. I couldn't agree more on the amount of conversations and work. And some of you were down here with us and had some of those conversations with us, and that's so appreciated as well. The other bill that passed that affects counties is regarding property tax outside of 1176 was Senate Bill 2201. And that actually, I believe, was the first bill. Yep, that's a note here. First bill signed in the 69th legislative session. And that was a bill, Senator Weber was the lead sponsor on that bill. And it's what Aaron mentioned earlier. It expanded the $500 this year's $500 primary residence credit to properties held in trust, life estates, and those purchased under contract for deed. So an additional 3,900 residents were able to take advantage of the primary residence credit. It was retroactive for tax years 24 and 25. So my apologies and gratitude to the county auditors who are now processing this second set of applications, and in many cases refunds for taxes that were paid that were now became eligible for the primary residence credit. That is permanent legislation, so that will be going forward. Those properties that meet those definitions will be eligible for the primary residence credit going forward. Next slide. Yes. A couple other property tax related bills. Senate Bill 2039, titled here Property Tax Exemption for Ag Storage. I think, Janelle and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this would be the fourth session that we, and not including interims, that we have had to have discussions about ag storage and whether or not ag storage, especially those related or those in town, maybe adjacent to railroad property, should be taxable or not taxable if it's a grain elevator that is no longer operating as a commercial elevator, owned now by a farmer in town, used to store ag crops. It's been discussion and has not, the legislature has not passed anything until this session. Senate Bill 2039 clarifies the definition of agricultural property exemptions, and language specifically says that raising agricultural crops includes storage of harvested crops until they are delivered to the first endpoint user. And it also clarifies that it includes land for greenhouses and nurseries, that those properties that meet those expanded definitions are eligible for the exemption. It expanded the farm structure exemption to include structures within city limits that are exclusively used by farmers and are affixed to land platted as ag land prior to March 30th, 1981. It does not apply to structures used for wholesale businesses that are unrelated to farming. And then the other key bill that we had a lot of discussion, brought in even bond counsel to learn about whether or not what effect different various elections would have on this legislation. This was a bill, lead sponsor on it was Representative Scott Wagner out of Fargo, and it requires counties, cities, schools, and parks to hold any election related to bonds during the primary or general election. In other words, you cannot have any more special elections to have the voters give you authority to bond or levy for debt, bond debt. I'm sorry, my words are losing me. And it also requires a 60% threshold for voters. So it's going to make it's going to be more challenging to have bonds passed in your communities. It's going to require that supermajority 60% threshold, and it's going to have to be held in conjunction with primary or general elections. So oftentimes, I believe, and Janelle, please pop in after this, I think schools are, they often have their bond elections in random months, and most counties, I think, do not administer those bond elections, those special elections on behalf of schools. that bond like language now, ballot language will now be on a primary or general election. And so it brings it into that normal election process that most counties administer for schools. Janelle, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I really don't. I think we did try to work on that 60% approval, being that those bond elections were narrowed down to just a primary or general. So that means that you'd only get one chance or two chances every 2 years to get that on the ballot and approved. But we just couldn't budge that. And so we ended up sticking with that 60% approval rating. The other thing I just wanted to note is that, you know, through these property tax conversations, we did bring forward some ideas and reforming property taxes by the means of taking some of those taxes that are on taxpayer statements off and shifting it to the state. We worked on that before the session. So there was one bill to remove the garrison diversion and extension from the local property taxes and shift that to the state. That would have been a $20 million cost to the state, a biennium. That measure failed. And then there was two proposals to ask the voters to eliminate the 1 mil that is levied for the state medical center. And those both also failed. And so really frustrating that here we're trying to find some solutions to actually really look at reform. In my opinion, these measures on the caps, these ideas about the caps, it's not really reform. It's more of a restriction on local government trying to do their jobs and serve their communities and address their needs. It's a restriction. But these would have been some reform ideas, but they were not. They just didn't go very far at all. So kind of frustrating on that end.
Yeah. Hey, Linda and Danelle, I want to jump in a little bit too on House Bill 1482. That was again primaried by Representative Scott Wagner, who is a former county commissioner in Cass County, who was term limited out. His idea is this is a better property tax reform idea than caps. So this was to try to counter a cap. His theory being a lot of property taxes driven by bond issues that are either a school, a county, a city, and they are held at times where I don't want to be conspiracy theorist, but times where there's not a lot of public engagement. So if there was a school bond issue for $40 million and it's on the weekend of February, nobody's really paying attention, and the numbers are really small, that ultimately prevails. His idea is this should only be, bond issues should only be on the primary or general election where the most amount of voters come out and vote. This is a significant change because this, of course, means that you could only do a bond issue every other year. As all of you know, the 2-year primaries and generals only come around every 2 years. So in the off years, you will not have the ability as a school or even a county. Counties don't do those special elections bonding very often, but you will not have the ability to go to the voters. So if you're building a new school and it goes down in the general election, you will not be able to put it back on the ballot for another 2 years. A significant change in policy. And whether you think it's right or wrong, that is the change in the policy. This, although the law doesn't specifically require the county to run the general or primary for the school or the cities, in all practical reality, I'm guessing the auditors will have a bit bigger load in terms of their ballot now will have a style that requires those bond issues on behalf of the schools or the cities. So we're going to have to sit down with all the political subdivisions that use bonding and make sure that they get all of those issues to the auditor in time, so we're not scrambling to put new things on our ballot styles as we come to those. And then just finally on Danelle's comment about the frustration, this is from the 30,000 foot perspective, and I'm not calling a legislators out on this, but of course, everybody wanted to talk property tax reform, and we're relying, our property taxes are allegedly too high, which by the way is demonstrably false in terms of where we are in the country. We're number 40 out of 50 in terms of our property tax burden. But nonetheless, the legislature and people wanted lower property taxes, but then we get to the legislature and they increase exemptions for certain properties, which is the 2039, and they vote down the possibility of shifting off of property taxpayers to the states. The simple thing is a 1 mil UND med school. And again, nothing against UND med school, but I think the state has plenty of money to fund UND med school outside of using a 1 mil property tax. In the grand scheme of things, is 1 mil really that big of a deal? No. But if you're not willing to even take on those low-hanging fruit, it's a little frustrating from my perspective on talking about property tax reform. So I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry, Linda, back to you.
No, I appreciate all that. And I believe that's the end of the property tax slide. So we'll turn it over to Jenny.
All right, thanks, Linda. Yes, I'll be reviewing some of the transportation related bills, and one of the main bills we took care of in the session for transportation was Senate Bill 2012. This was the DOT budget bill, and I can just say that a lot of sausage was made with this bill. It was the bill that kept changing. There were numerous conference committees, and changes actually were made up to the last day of the session. So just to do a quick review of what the breakdown of the bill incurs, the DOT budget bill totaled out at 2.7 billion for the biennium, and included in that bill about 230 million went to counties, 195 to cities, almost 80 million to townships, as well as 13.7 million to transits. So the bill started in the Senate, and right before crossover, the Senate decided to combine a number of infrastructure bills that went into the DOT budget. We had Senate Bill 2142, which was looking at utilizing some of the motor vehicle excise tax to fund township roads. Senate Bill 2151 was a bill that was going to be specific funding for bridges for political subs. And then Senate Bill 2372 was looking at adjusting the legacy earnings fund for some infrastructure as well. Within the initial bill, I shouldn't say initial, this was actually amended in on the House side, was to include a gas tax of 5 cents. That at the end was removed. They did keep in the motor vehicle tax, so 50% is still dedicated to transportation funding. 25% of that will be going into the highway tax distribution fund. So of that amount, along with the motor vehicle registration and fuel tax fees, 25%, like I said, will be coming from the highway distribution fund. 212 million will be going to counties and cities. 20.6 million will be going to townships, and then 9.7 million will be going into transit. So of that other 50% that's dedicated from the motor vehicle tax, 25% of that is going to be going into the flex transportation fund. This really got a substantial increase from the prior session. So right now, there is $230 million that is included in the flex transportation fund. And there's two ways that funds are going to be distributed out of the flex fund. There's going to be direct distributions, 44.85 million will be going out to counties and cities, and 20.7 million will be distributed to townships. I will say with the flex transportation fund, there's definitely, it's more heavier on the grant side than direct distributions. They are looking at having 44.85 million to non-oil counties and cities, 40.25 that are going to be specific to bridges. 31 million will be going to townships, and then 4 million will be going to transit. The grant applications, obviously the grant applications will be sent to the DOT, and the DOT will be ranking those applications based on their criteria, looking at needs-based distributions of the funds. Priority will be given to projects that match, that have federal match or private funds. And then also there will be looking at priority to give to those that improve roadways that serve as local corridors. So those will be, I would say, the a couple of the main priorities that they'll be looking at as far as providing grants for those projects. For township projects, just as an FYI, particularly for those that are unorganized, but also touching on the organized, the priority is going to be given to organized townships that levy at least 18 mills for general purposes, and that their general fund needs to be less than $100,000 in the prior year. For unorganized townships, the priority projects will be given to those townships that do levy at least 18 mills for their road and bridge purposes. One thing that I think is really important to note that they made a change in the flex funding is they changed the definition of non-oil producing counties just specific for the flex funds. So if the definition now includes that if a county has an average of less than 10 million barrels a year over the 3-year period, that they will now be considered non-oil producing just for the flex funds. So really that will only leave the big 4 counties remaining that would meet this definition of oil producing, which would be McKinsey, Montreal, Williams, and Dunn. Next slide, please, Danil. So the prairie dog bucket, we had some pretty significant changes to prairie dog funding as well. As you can see on the chart, the prairie dog bucket is actually going to be moved up in line because they removed the $400 million SIF bucket. And their reasoning for this is they feel that the prairie dog bucket will now have a higher likelihood of filling each biennium by removing that $400 million SIF bucket. So this would be considered more consistent funding for our political subs. I will say that the trade-off to doing that, they did reduce the prairie dog buckets from 230 million to 160 million. So that's a $70 million haircut. 72.5 million will be going to counties, 80 million to cities, and then 7.5 million to townships. And just to touch on how, different legislative sessions and how things change up, I think this is a good example of how these funding changes from session to session occur. 6 years ago, the SIF bucket was added in front of the prairie dog buckets, which we weren't very happy about. And then 4 years ago, they actually increased that SIF bucket to 400 million. And now this session, the legislature decided to remove that bucket. So it's hard to anticipate sometimes what each session will bring. So we try to continue to be proactive in educating legislators, and also want to give a shout out to you all because we appreciate your efforts in working with your legislators and educating them on what your county issues and needs are as well. As Aaron alluded to earlier, we do a lot of work at the session, but you all doing the work at home and contacting your legislators and keeping a pulse and helping them understand what our needs are on the local level is really important as well.
Yeah, and Jenny and all, we did a very targeted message on 2012 while it was in conference committee, just recognizing the vast differences between the Senate and the House version of this bill. And the House's focus really was not where our views were aligned, that we're aligned with. And so we did a very direct messaging to our legislators through our Common Ground newsletter, and really supported prairie dog and emphasized the need to have more direct distributions for counties to address their needs. And we heard through the halls that message was received. I really do think that while I know that the Senate conferees were really wanted to see a lot of the same items that we did in the end bill. I think that message really helped push the needle with the House members. So that message and counties follow up to encourage their legislators to support the concepts that we asked them to reach out on, I think really paid off on this bill.
Totally agree with that. I think that is worth mentioning that on the House side, they actually wanted to remove the prairie dog bucket entirely and then allocate more funds into the flex fund for grants. And kind of our stance was, grant funding is great, but with grants, there's winners of grants and losers. You will get the funding and you may not get the funding. And with direct distribution, at least everybody gets something. And that was kind of the message that we really tried to put forth. And I do agree the Senate definitely was more agreeable to those types of terms and rather than the House. But I do think that by you all reaching out to your legislators as well as us educating them through our common ground, it did make a difference, and we were able to keep the prairie dog bucket. And even knowing that that SIF bucket is being removed, even though the funds aren't as high in our original amounts, I do feel confident that this will be a bucket that will fill every biennium, and so there will be more consistent funding with prairie dog funds. Also, just to make it clear, in the initial sausage making, if you will, we were looking at the definition of non-oil producing counties initially was going to be across the board for all funding. And that did change at the very end, where the non-oil definition of the less than 10 million barrels, again, is just specific for the flex funds. So when you're looking at the prairie dog distributions, those counties will aren't part of that. So that'll be the 9 counties are still considered oil producing for the prairie dog distributions, but under the flex funding, the only ones that will not be eligible in that area would be the big 4 oil producers. So just wanted to make sure that that was clarified, because I think initially in the bill, that definition was going to go across for all funding. Next slide, please. And then just a couple of other highlights. Like Aaron said, sometimes we don't talk about the bills that failed, but I think there are a few of them that we wanted to mention here. House Bill 1382 was the gas tax bill that failed. It was a 3-cent gas tax that was going to be a direct distribution to counties, cities, and townships at 1 cent each. That bill actually failed because the House included a 5-cent gas tax in the DOT budget. And unfortunately, that got pulled before it went to the House floor. The one before that, sorry, I skipped House Bill 1065. There were changes to prairie dog distributions that are going to be coming to organized and unorganized townships. This came from the state treasurer's office. And rather than doing an equal distribution to townships across the board, they are now going to base their distributions on certified road miles. So I know every year that counties sign off on the certified road miles that get submitted to the state treasurer's office. But I do ask that you all review the definition of what a certified road mile is for accurate reporting, now that it's going to be substantiated by those road miles. And just as a reminder, sodded roads and goat paths don't meet the definition. So just make sure that you're working with your townships, that you're verifying those road miles for that distribution. One other bill that I feel was substantial for us on highways was House Bill 1407. They were trying to increase the weight limits, not only on state highways, but all highways to 113 pounds. We were able to defeat that bill. They did put in an option to post lower weight limits if the county so chose or political sub so chose, but we just felt it was not a good bill. A lot of our county roads were already not at that, are at the 85.5. And we also stated that with the, potential property tax caps at that time, to be able to ask for all of our roads to be upgraded to that high of a weight limit would just be something that couldn't be done reasonably. House Bill 1444. This is adding township roads to the county road system. I don't want to get into a lot of details, but there was a situation where a township road wanted to, they did not want to do some things with a private company, and the county tried to take over the road to be able to manage it and do the maintenance and construction on it, and it ended up not working out in their favor. And so House Bill 1444 came about. So the county commission may include a township road into their county road system by the vote of the commission. The county, though, is required to hold a public input meeting, and that the county commission also must notify the township of any road or roads that they're going to add to their road system, but it is ultimately going to be up to the county commission on whether they want to add any township roads into their system. And then one other bill, just of a note, we had some issues with off-highway vehicles operating in county areas, and there was no real authority for the counties to be able to do anything in regards to these off-road vehicles operating on county roads. And so House Bill 1346 now gives counties the authority to do ordinances to regulate the use of these off-road vehicles, and also are able to issue fines for any infractions on these off-road vehicles. So in a nutshell, that's where we're at on the transportation side. So I'll turn it back over to Aaron to talk about budget bills.
Hey, you bet. Thanks, Jen. A couple of things I just want to talk about on that previous slide on that House Bill 1346, counties being able to create an ordinance for the off-highway vehicles. This is a very positive development, but we do need to think through this a little bit more. In certain areas, in particular, even around Burleigh County here, not in the city, a number of people are using their four-wheelers and UTVs and driving in the ditches. And snowmobiles are not so bad because the ground is frozen, but unfortunately, people are taking these UTVs out when it's raining and muddy, which is fun, by the way. I like doing it myself, but it really does tear up the ditch, and there is no authority, or there was no authority to really do anything about it, because technically that right-of-way is open for travel. So the legislature agreed, as opposed to a county going home rule to get that authority, that they would just grant us this authority. Many people don't realize that counties are very limited in ordinance authority. Cities have vast more power in terms of ordinances. The only real rub on that bill is cities have their own courts. So if an ordinance is violated in the city, they can go to their court to have the due process for that individual. County courts, as everybody knows, has been taken over by the state, and we just have state district courts. So I would guess, hopefully everybody just pays their $50 fine, but we're going to have some discussions with the district court if someone challenges that, where that gets challenged at, and why should the district court care about ordinance violations for the county. So again, further discussions, we'll dig into that deeper. My preference, I guess, would be just in the short term, deputies use more of the smile instead of the stick, and just warn people that that could eventually cost them $50. So just be smart about where you use your UTVs. The other thing I was just going to mention from a 30,000 foot level on the gas tax bills. The Association of Counties has supported gas tax increase for decades now, in large part because our fuel tax, our sales tax on gas, is the lowest in the region by far and away. And a good 40% of gas tax comes through people who are passing through the state. So it is a potential revenue source. But on the higher level thinking, as I talked about property tax, we really do get mixed messages from the legislature when they say you need to really control your property tax dollars. But yet when we throw out other solutions for funding, such as gas tax increase, they shut that down. So again, I understand it. Quite frankly, I don't like getting up in front of a committee saying we need to increase taxes. And that gas tax was probably going to die one way or the other. The citizens hearing that they're going to get a tax increase when the state allegedly has billions of dollars is not good politics. But at some point, if we are going to try to move away from the property tax system, you're going to have to find alternative revenue sources, and this may be one of them. And again, no tax policy is totally good, totally bad, but food for thought as we go into the future. Okay, back to the budget bills. The House Bill 1015 is the Office of Management and Budget. This is just funny to me because this bill, the OMB bill, for decades used to be what we called the Christmas tree bill. It would be the last bill passed at the end of the session, and that is when all the legislative leadership or people in positions of power would stick all their special interest projects. And in fact, they were doing that so much that the North Dakota Supreme Court stepped in and threw out the Office of Management and Budget bill last time around because all of these things were stuck in without hearings. And so the legislature has responded, and the Office of Management and Budget is now very clean compared to where it used to be. That said, the Department of Commerce now is the bill that everything gets stuck on. So they can't help themselves, but that's just kind of fun for somebody who's a casual observer of legislative politics. Back to the 1015, there was some very good successes for county government on this. Guardianships, or what we would call public administrators, those are people serving as guardians for those who can't afford it or have no family that is willing to do the work. That is by statute a county responsibility. But for the last 15 years, the state has taken over that responsibility and has paid for those service providers who really are doing the Lord's work. That is very difficult work. And originally the counties were contracting for those services, but now the state is taking it over. And this is where you find the $8.1 million that is appropriated to the Office of Management and Budget that actually flows through the Association of Counties to those service providers. The Association of Counties takes $0 for that program, but we set up a fairly robust web portal that those providers can provide information on who they're taking care of, where is the court order, and then if they turn out to be accurate, we pay them $18, now $19 a day per ward. You heard me right, $19 a day to pay for taking care of somebody's medical decisions, whether or not they are on life support or not. You get $19 a day. So it really is the Lord's work. Maybe many of you are guardians for your parents or your grandparents, and you know how difficult that can be. This 8.1 is $1 million increase from last legislative session, and is going to be a good shot in the arm again for those providers doing the work. In conjunction with House Bill 1015, I want to mention that Senate Bill 2029 is the first state agency created in decades. Senate Bill 2029 creates the statewide Office of Guardianship that will be staffed by 4 administrators overseeing guardianships in North Dakota. As I mentioned, the Association of Counties runs what we call the PASS program. Money comes in to us from that 8.1, and we distribute it. At some point in time, probably by April 1 of 2026, we will do a handoff once that state agency is set up, and all the monies that is appropriated to the OMB will then go to the Office of State Guardianships. I think that's a positive development. I always made clear to the legislature, the Association of Counties is willing to pass on those dollars to the providers, but we do not have staff, at least that we had currently, to really have a robust system of checking up on the guardians and the wards. So ultimately, the legislature agreed that there needs to be more oversight of that program and not just a pass-through dollar kind of program. So I do think that ultimately this will be a better solution than we have now. That said, I do like to stand on the soapbox a little bit and tell the legislature that the Association of Counties was running this program for $0 and 0 FTEs. We just took it on, and now the state is coming in and they need 4 FTEs to do what we were doing. That's a little unfair because, of course, they will take it to a new level, which is appreciated. But it is always one of those little jabs you can say counties do it bigger, faster, better, and cheaper than the state. A couple other things that you'll find in the House Bill 1015 too is the $300 million for the state hospital. That is, it was controversial. I think anybody who's been out to Jamestown and looked at the state hospital recognizes the need to upgrade that facility. There are many rundown, I don't want to say dilapidated, but very poor shaped buildings. And so the $300 million to build a new state hospital seems to make a lot of sense. That said, there were a lot of legislators who feel centralizing mental health patients isn't the right answer either. Building big facilities is not as preferred as building smaller facilities in the local communities. And ultimately, the argument won that you still need a centralized facility for at least some of those people. And you can still provide services on the local level, but we still need a new state hospital. So after a bit of controversy, that ended up passing. So they will begin the process for building that out in Jamestown again. And then just finally, OMB is also the place that you find the state employees' salary increases, and the legislature gave a 3 and 3 for state employees. There are a number of reasons why the legislature should be meeting every year, and there's a number of reasons they shouldn't. One of the reasons that they should meet every year is salary increases. The legislature has to create the salary structure for 2 years as opposed to 1 year. So you always typically get this where they'll come in and just say, let's make it across the board 3 and 3, as opposed to looking at the numbers and maybe going to 4 or 5 1 year and then going to 2 1 year. But that's what you get when you have a 2-year session. But that will be kind of the basis for the next 2 years. And I know a lot of counties kind of operate similar in terms of what is state government doing for their employees, because a lot of the employees that we are competing for in the marketplace of good workers. So 3 and 3 is what the state will be doing. A couple more budget bills. I'll just mention House Bill 1012, which is DHS's budget. I'm happy to report that when we originally envisioned property tax reform at the association a number of years ago, one of the ideas is social services being funded by the counties isn't an efficient use of property tax dollars. Many of the high demand areas for social services are also some of the most lower property tax values. So by shifting the tax burden to the state, that equalizes everybody's tax burden more so than just putting it on a small group of people. And so the legislature agreed, and the legislature took 20 mills off of everybody's property tax. That 20 mills can never return. That was taken off. The 20 mills was designed to support county social services, and that 20 mills went away, and then the state backfilled it with, in this particular case, $250 million. So social services, being county government and being the ones providing the service, is the real benefit, and yet it's not borne by the cost of property tax payers. It's borne by the state. That has been a very successful hybrid model. And again, that was some of the ideas we were pushing in terms of our property tax reform, is continue to provide the services locally, but pay for it with state dollars so it's not a burden on that property tax. But again, the legislature was very clear that they are going to continue to fund social services, and that bucket gets filled, will be getting filled again. So a big win for not only the property taxpayer, but for social service zones to make sure they're funded appropriately. And then I'll just turn over to Mary for a couple of the other items in the bill for Department of Health.
Thanks, Aaron. Yes, as you may know, local public health units were also at the Capitol quite a bit this session, and one of our biggest asks every session is for state aid funding. That is funding that is flexible funding, which is so important and vital to all of the health units because it isn't tied to any specific grant, which most of the funding sources are program grants or things of that nature. So that state aid funding is a huge deal for us. The $8 million is level funding. That's what we got last session. We were looking to increase that by a couple million, but the state really didn't have an appetite for increasing anything this year. So we were very happy and consider it a win that we have our level funding at $8 million. That again is for the biennium. So 2 years, and is also split out among all 28 local public health units. That is, there's a formula for that based on population and other factors, so a base and population. So that was our big win for us in state aid funding. Aaron, are you talking about the behavioral health grants?
Yeah, I'll just highlight, because I know it looks like we're at 11:21. A couple of the big wins in that bill also were some dollars to provide some community behavioral health. Everybody agrees mental health, chemical dependency services need to be beefed up. So hopefully this again is a first step. By no means is this the total answer, but they did throw some money into some of those community behavioral health clinics. So a big win on that realm. And I think Danelle is going to cover the 1003, the Attorney General.
Yeah, besides it being the budget for the office, there were a couple things in there that just want to bring to our attention to the counties. There was a bill specifically that said that judges could not waive 24/7 fees. This is a practice that has been seen happening in Cass County. And so the Sheriff Johnner had initiated a bill to specifically say that that practice can no longer go on. And then that bill was defeated. This language was inserted in the Attorney General budget and was part of the final product that was passed. So from now on, judges may not waive those fees. And then the other provision that was removed from the bill that the sheriff supported was a registry for vape products. And so in the final meeting of a conference committee, that section was removed. So just wanted to let everybody know about that last minute change. Moving on to the DOCR budget, besides again the budget for the Department of Corrections, it also included a number of things that are important to our counties on the corrections side of things. They definitely are making a huge investment in increasing their space. As all of our counties know, there is definitely an overcrowding at our prison system on any given day. North Dakota counties and regional facilities are housing 200 state sentenced inmates. So that just shows like how many state sentenced inmates that should be in a state facility or sitting in a county facility. And so they funded the completion for the Heart River Correctional Center to be constructed. That is the facility that's going to be on what is known as the Youth Correctional Center grounds in Mandan. So this is going to be a women's prison. They funded temporary housing at MRCC. So that is the facility that is in South Bismarck. And then they also directed some funding to plan and design for a new minimum security male facility that would be on the state prison grounds. In addition, that bill, thanks to Representative John Nelson, increased the reimbursement to counties from $110 a day to $115. So that is good news for our counties that are housing those inmates. and then also included a study of sentencing practices and correctional and parole systems.
I'll just do a quick retirement related. The PERS, as you all know, last year we shut down the public employees retirement system in terms of a defined benefit program, but that is only for general employees. The public safety plan still has a defined benefit program and not a defined contribution program. There are many that believe that and necessarily believe that they should be also getting the benefits of a defined benefit program. And even though they're not necessarily in a squad car, they still go through the same emotional tough times. And one of those is correction officers in training. So that opens it up that even though that they're not technically on staff in the jail, they are still eligible to start getting some enrollment. And the dispatchers, EMS is also allowed on those. Again, dispatchers, here, the testimony that really put this bill over the top, a number of dispatchers came in and gave stories of people either being killed or very, very horrible stories, and they have to live with that. So the statistics are pretty clear. Dispatchers also have a tremendous impact on their emotional health. And so it's important to make sure that they have a long, good retirement program. So that opens it up on the public safety plan. And then you'll be hearing more from me about this when we kind of sort out if and what we could do. House Bill 1602 allows political subdivisions to opt out of the PERS defined contribution plan, the DC plan, if you will. There is a possibility that the Association of Counties, League of Cities, and whatnot could put together a retirement package that would be beneficial to your brand new employees, but we are not at the stage to announce anything yet. That said, this 1602 goes into effect August. So employees that are new to your county from January to August have to be on the PERS defined contribution program. But come August, you can go out and select whoever you want, whether it's PERS, whether it's your local retirement solutions, or whether there's something in the future that we can talk about. That's a significant win. We really appreciate our partners over at PERS, and we're forever joined at the hip because they still run the PERS defined benefit plan. But we felt like there could be other options on the DCs as opposed to just the PERS plan. That's a whole webinar in and of itself. I'll take this moment also to mention that the PERS board was very gracious yesterday and reversed course on a ruling they made where if you retired from county government and you were drawing your PERS defined benefits and you ran for county commission, you would no longer be eligible to receive your retirement as you're an elected official from as a still with the same county. They reversed course on that, and at least temporarily those folks that retired in county government and became county auditors are now eligible to continue to receive their benefits. PERS allowed them, the theory is PERS allowed them to go. PERS was not aware of the federal law that did not allow that, so PERS took the high road and the responsibility and is going to go forward with that. For future folks, we still haven't solved that issue. We will have to work with our local legislators and even our federal partners to see if we can't come up with a better solution for that too. But that was a big win, and I appreciate PERS and the board members willing to listen to our concerns on that. That's it.
Yeah, moving to law enforcement related bills, House Bill 1096. This is something that we started working on before the session to reduce the communication service fee from 5%. Our proposal was to 1%. The legislature decided on 2.5%. What this ultimately does is allow for more dollars to be directed to serve the 911 system. As many of our county people know, We at NDACo took an initiative to change up how those 911 fees were being collected and distributed, and took on the burden here in our office, which really reduced the expenses, the costs, and the workload of those communication service companies or providers. And so this was an appropriate time to look at that fee. So a good win for our 911 system. House Bill 1193 is the Back the Blue grants, something that was passed last session. It came in as a very different looking bill, and we were able to save it from being killed to suggest that they could revamp it into really the structure that was proposed and passed last session as a bonus for local law enforcement and local correctional officers. And that's where it ended up, $3.5 million. But they did relook at it in the uses, and it is focused only now on retention bonuses. In the past biennium, you could use it for recruitment bonuses or training or retention, and now it's just focused on retention. And we want to make sure that those dollars are being used appropriately and that they can guarantee the best, the greatest outcomes. In a preliminary survey that I did during the session on the Back the Blue grants that were received last year or last session, it looks like a great majority of counties and sheriff's offices and jails used those bonuses for retention. And so this is probably the most appropriate way to use those dollars. Of the 3.5 million, a chunk of it is allocated focused on those smaller departments, and that really is to allow for them to have maybe a greater stipend bonus for those officers that are serving in those more rural areas that are harder to keep their officers in. Senate Bill 2277 designates Highway 200 as North Dakota's Fallen Peace Officer Memorial Highway. Appropriate to be mentioning this as this is the week that we're remembering those fallen officers. What's significant about Highway 200 is that crosses right through basically the middle of North Dakota. And so I don't know what the design of the sign will look like, but my vision in my head sees, you know, the outline of North Dakota with a blue line right through the middle where Highway 200 is. This is also the highway where one of our deputies was killed from Mercer County in 2 years ago. So it really does have significance. Other law enforcement related bills, House Bill 1344. This is another issue that we worked on prior to the session. Really, we were hearing from our counties that they were holding inmates for DOCR that had been sentenced to the state and they weren't getting paid. And tracking that down, we were able to discover that the way that the law was written in a prior session, I think it was 2019 when we got that passed, it referenced that DOCR would pay the counties when they enter prioritization. And that is actually, like, I guess, a switch that needs to be flipped, a decision that has to be made by DOCR. Okay, now we're in prioritization, and that would trigger then the payments. And so this bill really just clarified that regardless if counties are housing state sentenced inmates, the state needs to pay. And so the DOCR did negotiate in there to have it that they have a 7 days after notification to have that payment go into effect. The agreements need to be reached between the Department of Corrections and the county for holding those state sentenced inmates, and that would also include the medical costs. Just a couple other little bills. 1613 we worked really hard on as the session went on the use of robocops. It sounds very I guess futuristic, but I guess it was more something to try to get ahead of. We were able to really work on the language to really get at what the legislator was envisioning there and not be harmful to what is current practice with using, especially with SWAT efforts. Senate Bill 2093, this started out as an income tax exemption for benefits paid to spouses of retired peace officers. I had a great intentions. On the House side, they amended the bill to put in income tax relief for all, which ended up being, I guess, it ended up, the Senate couldn't support that, and they couldn't come to a negotiation on that bill, and so that the bill ended up dying. While the Attorney General's Truth in Sentencing bill failed, which strengthened a lot of penalties, there were a number of other penalties that did pass. And I'm not going to go through each bill. Mainly, I just wanted it here for the record to show that there are a number of other bills that passed that do increase penalties, especially for reckless endangerment, fleeing, who is that owner, instead of having to go through a fleeing incident and maybe putting other people in harm. This assumes that the vehicle owner is responsible for those fleeings, and then it also sets penalties, and then also mandatory minimum sentences for human trafficking. So there were some penalties that were increased this session, while it didn't come from Senate Bill 2128. And as I mentioned in the DOCR budget, there's language in there to study sentences and practices of the Department of Corrections. And that really came from Senate Bill 2128 being defeated, that they will look at what is going on and try to come up with some thoughtful legislation in the next session. Also, it's been getting a lot of headlines, but House Bill 1298 increases the speed limit on our interstates to 80 miles an hour. And it also changed the speeding fine schedule. And that applies not only to the interstate, but off interstate highways as well. So make sure that you check those out. On jail funding, as I alluded to, we've been really experiencing a lot of ripple effects from the state prison system being overcrowded. We came into the session after having some meetings with legislators with some really good ideas and concepts of how to assist our counties. 1197 was introduced to provide $50 million for jail improvement grants. We have 5 jails in the state that are either looking at building or expanding. And so this was really to help them out by maybe giving them $10 million in a grant to help them reduce some of that local burden. That bill was ultimately amended into a study of jail infrastructure needs. Personally, I feel that this is going to be a study that's way too late, and any legislation that might come from the jail is from the study is going to be too late for the counties that are especially in the works right now. House Bill 1213 sought to provide at least $200 million in low interest loans at 2% for jail improvements. That also failed. And House Bill 1022, that had a clause in there to increase the infrastructure revolving loan fund from 150 to 200 million. And then in the last days of the session, that provision was removed from the bill. So didn't get a lot of help on the end of jails and their funding needs, which is an unfortunate effect of the session.
So for public health related policy issues backed by popular demand was septic bills. Senate Bill 2267, which ultimately passed, was one that local public health units initially opposed because it had a lot of things that were not helpful to us. Instead, we were supporting House Bill 1541. House Bill 1541 and Senate Bill 2267 had were sponsored by a senator and a Republican, or sorry, representative, senator and a representative on both bills. So in the end, 1541 was defeated, but 2267 basically mirrored everything that was in 1541 that we were looking for. Which includes DEQ oversight for rules and installer licensure, and it maintains local public health permitting and inspections. Along with that, Senate Bill 2308, that was a larger bill by the governor's office looking at all of the boards and in the state and seeing which ones are really active and not. On-site wastewater recycling technical committee was part of a session made a couple of years ago, and they have done pretty much all the work that they can do, and it was time to hand that over to DEQ. So that board is no longer going to happen, but again, that is in now 2267, so that all worked. As you've heard earlier, we spend a lot of time trying to defeat bills that are not beneficial to us and maybe even harmful. House Bill 1454 did pass. It was one bill out of 6 that passed. The rest we were able to defeat. And 1454 basically says government entities in the state cannot require vaccines without opt-out options. And then House Bill 1577 provides for a wastewater infrastructure grant. It outlines duties of DEQ and authorizes BND line of credit for these wastewater infrastructure grants that are needed. It's a one-time appropriation. There is a legislative management study, and emergency clause were also included on that bill. Back to you, Danelle.
Danelle, if you're speaking, it looks like you're muted still.
Thanks, Alicia. Yes, I was. Here too, there are several bills that were election related that the defeat of them is a big success. 3 of them that you see on the screen, 1384 would have required county auditors to be elected. We had commissioners come in to support oppose this bill, auditors opposing the bill, and provide the legislature with information on why, in some cases, having an appointed county auditor is the best fit. Also providing them with information on how many of those positions are combined positions. So ultimately that bill failed. 1587 would have proposed hand counting audits of all ballots after the election. Again, you can imagine how horrible this would have been for our counties and our county auditors and staff. And so this was another one that we came in and were able to kill. And 2178 also would have created many different ballot styles for the primary election, as they really wanted only one party to be on a primary. And you'd have to be able to declare then what party you wanted to vote for in that election to receive that ballot. So that was another bad bill that was killed. The other 2 that were successful were bills that were brought forward by the Secretary of State's office, and we came in to support them. It is important to know that some of the last minute changes on House Bill 1165 were changes that needed to be made in response to President Trump's executive order regarding absentee ballot deadlines. And so for absentee ballots, they will now need to be delivered before the polls close on election day in order for them to be counted. So that's a very big difference from how we've been doing practice has been and law has been in the past. And so there'll be education with our auditors on that. And hopefully we can make sure that the public is well aware of that change as well. Aaron, I'm going to move it to you.
Yeah, just a couple of Senate Bill 2180. This is a significant change. Since statehood, the open records has never been considered giving a person a right to speak at a board meeting, a non-commissioner to speak at a board meeting. This changes it, and this gives the public a right to address the board, or any board for that matter, school, city, county, and they get a right to address the board, but you can put on some restrictions. So we'll talk about that in more detail, but the policy you'll create is how long somebody can speak and those kind of things. I've got mixed feelings on this, as I've told you during the how to run a meeting. I preferred the old way that the public really didn't have a right to address the board. The board is for board times to make decisions. And on the other hand, it also is political suicide to tell citizens they can't address their government in that format. So I think we probably found a midway point where you can create some guardrails so it doesn't get off track. If you ever want to be entertained, go look up the county commission from Riverside or LA County in California. They don't have guardrails, and they just provide everybody a right to address the board. And there are people that will come in and talk about Elvis being an alien, and it will go on for hours. And most of the time, the commission just disappears. And luckily, we're not going to be into that, but that is a game changer. A couple of failed bills I don't want to spend too much time on because we're running a little short. So I'll go to the next slide. The next slide is a couple other miscellaneous bills that, thank you to our zone directors and our state's attorneys, Senate Bill 2036 and 2037. This has been a long arc of work that has been done. There are kids, children who previously would be in the criminal justice system. And all the evidence shows that if you put a low-level child into the criminal justice system, they generally become a worse offender. And so what we've tried to do is these low-level minor crimes, or not necessarily even crimes, but delinquencies, is we call them children in need of services, where you get them services and so they keep out of the criminal justice system and they don't spiral down. So 2036 and 37 give more direction on that philosophy, when you can look for processes to get those folks out of the justice system. And then Senate Bill 2112 is also a positive development, which again goes back to the concept of we need to have local services developed so you can keep people out of the criminal justice system. And this also contains a study. So I know the zone directors and the prosecutors and sheriffs will be looking at that one if it's picked come the interim. So with that, again, that's not an absolute 100% coverage of every bill. We'll continue to turn out bill updates and those kind of things as we get it. I thank you for being engaged. I can't be more proud to represent county government. I can't be more proud to work with the people I work with at the Association of Counties. I don't know if we have a slide, but we'll announce this right now. I know we sped through a lot of the 1176 property tax relief and those kind of things. We are actually going to do a full-blown workshop June 16th from 1 to 4:30 in Bismarck. It will both be a physical conference and it will be live streamed and recorded. This is in combination with City Schools and Parks, because we're going to have to make sure all of the auditors or financial people from every political subdivision understands how to calculate these 3% caps. Now, everybody is certainly invited, but we really are trying to target this down in the weeds to make sure how you fill out your maximum levy worksheet. So again, as many auditors, fiscal people that we can get, that's really who we're targeting. But unless we fill up, everybody still is invited. But at least you should be considering looking at it, because commissioners are going to have to understand the limitations that might come back to you when we're talking about caps. So that's the big announcement. I'm looking forward to that conference. I know it's busy time for everybody, but hope to see you in Bismarck on June 16th. It will be an in and out, no frills, no thrills, and in the weeds. So with that, Alicia, I would ask if there's any questions that have come up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aaron, and the rest of the NDACo Ledge team. Let's waste no time and jump right in. First question reads, does the 3% cap apply to soil conservation districts?
I guess we never discussed who's going to handle all these, but the answer is yes. Caps, no. Linda, answer it.
The That's the right answer. The answer is yes. The only exceptions to the 3% cap are the state medical center levy and garrison diversion. Those are the two levying authorities that are not subject to the caps.
Okay, and then
That's what I was gonna say.
clarification then on tax credits. Does that cover homestead credits?
I'll grab that one too again. So the way it reads, and it's actually spelled out in the law, that the homestead credit will apply first. And if there's any dollars left owing on the bill, the $1,600 primary residence credit will follow after that, which is why they feel like a lot of those homestead credit properties will be zeroed out between those two credits. But the homestead credit and veterans credit get applied first.
Okay, and these next questions, a lot of these will probably pertain to the tax for you, Linda. Next question, or maybe just a comment you have for it. We have a situation where 2 residents applied for a homestead credit and their properties are in a trust and the state denied both the credits. Any comments?
Again, I don't know the particulars of that exact situation, so I don't have anything to comment.
Okay. Do all entities now have to have a budget hearing in September, October?
Great question. All entities have had to have that unless they set their budget like townships in March at their annual meeting. Then the only reason they would need to have a subsequent final budget hearing between September 7th and October 7th would be if they intend to raise the levy that their electors or whatever their electors approved at their annual meeting in March. If they don't make any changes to the March levy, then they do not need to have another meeting in September. So the September budget meeting applies to all political subdivisions unless they have another prescribed election voted approved mill levy earlier in the year, and then they would not need to. And I think there are a couple of other public entities, and I'm not off the top of my head, I can't say what they are, but townships are one of them.
Okay. Will there still be a $100,000 levy requirement for budget hearing notice?
Nope, that was eliminated. The $100,000 levy notice was eliminated in House Bill 1176. So everyone's going to have to provide the budget hearing notice and to the auditor by August 10th, and all of those hearings will go on the ballot, or on the ballot. Gee, my gosh, on the budget notice that goes out in August.
Oh, let's see here, and you may just, if you could clarify again, some of these might have repeated. So no preliminary budget to county by August 10th, just the final budget submitted to the county by October 10th?
Correct. That is correct.
On the budget hearing notice, how will the township and fire district budget hearings be handled, being they will have already happened? Will we have to send a notice out for every parcel or just a blanket one with all the budget hearings listed?
So great question. And that would be what I referred to in that previous response, in that townships and fire districts who do vote earlier in the year, their electors vote, are not required to provide budget hearing notice or hold a budget hearing in September unless they intend to raise the levy beyond what their electors approved at their budget hearing in March. And I believe the fire districts are in June.
Okay. Will townships be restricted by the 3% cap?
Great question. And a lot of discussion about that back and forth. And our very own executive director, Aaron Burst, put on his attorney brain, read the language and said, wait a second here. Townships levies are all voter approved, and voter approved levy authority is one of the exemptions at least year by year. And since townships, their electors approve their levies every year at their annual meeting in March, essentially the 3% cap does not apply. However, if townships want to increase their levy authority for a longer period of time, they are also required to have that, more than year by year. They would also have to hold a vote, just like every other political subdivision, and their electors would have to be notified about that. But yeah, we'll get into more of that detail when we meet on June 16th and do the 1176 training.
Okay, next question. So the county will be required to put a school bond issue measure on the county ballot, even if we don't do the school election?
Oh,
I'll jump in on that.
yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, again, like I said, there is nothing in the law that says the county has to run the school election. It just says the school election has to happen on a primary or general. So in theory, the school could run their own primary ballot. In practice, it would make no sense to have multiple election places. So I'm guessing we will have to make sure we coordinate with those political subdivisions so they can get on a county-based ballot. Again, I recognize the potential work issue for auditors, but that's how it's ultimately going to roll out, in my opinion.
Yep, and to add to that comment for the auditors that might be listening, who don't have contracts to administer the school's general elections, my understanding is you guys are going to a new election system. And so now if you don't have those street file lines in place in your election systems, now might be the time to do that. And my understanding is that the new election system is going to be GIS driven for the street files. So it's a good awareness that although the bill does not require, I guarantee you your schools are going to be looking to you to run those ballot questions. And like Aaron said, it doesn't make sense to have a separate election for a question like that, in the school building while we're running county elections. So I'd say be prepared that you might be asked to have it on your ballot.
Okay. When will we be able to start applying for the Flex Fund? In 2023, I think it was June, July?
Alicia, I can verify that, but I know DOT is working on the guidelines on the grant piece of it. I believe it will be July 1, but I will confirm that.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. And I think this one's for you too. Regarding one of the transportation bucket slides, 2 state general fund buckets, is that a duplicate or should the total of 430 million be in the state general fund?
No, there are two state general fund buckets. That's not an error.
Regarding highway, is the motor vehicle tax a new revenue source or a change to an existing one? And would NDACo have an estimated dollar change sheet they could share?
Did you say it was the motor vehicle excise tax, Alicia, or the motor vehicle fuel tax? I wasn't sure.
Sure, it reads motor vehicle tax.
Okay, well, there's a motor vehicle excise tax, and that's been in existence for as long as I know. And half of that currently, prior to the DOT budget being passed, 50% of that went to transportation funding, and 50% of that excise tax went for the state general fund. While we were going through this bill, the House actually was looking to remove the motor vehicle excise tax in full. The Senate wanted to keep it as is, and ultimately at the end, the motor vehicle excise tax did stay. Again, 25% of that is now being allocated to the highway tax distribution fund, along with motor vehicle registrations and motor vehicle fuel tax fees. And then the other 25% of that, which equates to about 87.5 million, will be going into the Flex Transportation Fund along with a transfer of SIF funds. So there's 142.5 million of SIF funds.
Jenny? I'll just, Alicia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll just expound a little bit on what Jenny was saying and let you know that to the best of our ability, as if assuming that there will be some estimates available, we will be providing estimates on all of this funding in the annual budget memo that comes out typically. I would say this year it might be closer to end of June. So the annual budget memo will have all the estimates for this funding.
Thank you. Next, regarding House Bill 1015, it gives state employees raises of 3% for 2 years, and we county employees may not get anything because of the 3% cap. How is that equitable for all? Most county employees also have to pay for their health insurance too.
I guess I'll jump in. There's going to be a lot of things to work through. That's the easiest way.
And I think, Aaron, did you want to touch a little bit on capturing those scenarios that, you know, somehow letting you know or email or whatever?
Yeah. What I would say, we haven't fully flushed this out, but since we have these budget limitations of the caps, we're really trying to think through how can we capture lost opportunity costs. So if you were going to buy a motor grader because you really need it, but you have a 3% cap and you couldn't do it, the best I can tell you right now is email me those frustrations, because at some point we're going to need to bring that back to the legislature and document what that actually did. I agree. The legislature gave 3% raises to state employees, and then at the same time capped local government. That will be very problematic to work through. But we need to capture that data, so keep that in the back of your brain when you're going through your budgets.
Okay. Next, does the change to farm structures being exempt within city limits start in the 2025 year or 2026? And do ag storage buildings qualify for exemption if they are on land that was not ag land in 1981?
Alicia, I don't have that bill right in front of me. I think I saw in the notes that that doesn't take effect until tax year 2026, I believe, because most of the valuations that were past that date for this year. So I believe it's 2026. And I'm going to also defer the response to further interpretation of that language to the tax directors that followed that legislation very closely. I'll say not having a good background on how that's handled now and what's different, I don't want to mislead anybody. So I'm not certain on what happens if it's after March 30th, 81.
Will we be able to move properties from the FRE program to the PRC? I have retired farmers who would benefit more from the PRC.
You know, everybody has one primary residence. So if you're saying a retired farmer has a house in town that they're paying tax on and a farm home that they're not paying tax on, I would think that their primary residence is wherever they live, and every primary residence is eligible for the PRC. If they are paying tax on a home on their farm and they are retired, and that's the only home they have, and that is their primary residence, that is also eligible for the primary residence credit.
Okay, and the individual did confirm that the farm is where they live.
Correct. So if it's a taxable property and it's not farm home exempt, doesn't get the farm home exemption, then it would be eligible for the primary residence credit.
Okay, great questions. Next, why did the North Dakota Association of Counties support House Bill 1258? And what is the reason for introducing an amendment to cancel a county's insurance if that county goes against the wishes of the PSC or Industrial Commission?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take that. First off, we didn't support 1258. We did not oppose it. 1258 is for transmission lines that have been approved by the PSC. And quite frankly, you can't have routing on high power transmission lines done at every township, county level, city level for that matter. So we were going to lose that one way or the other. I understand the frustration, and I obviously we support local control for zoning, but we were going to lose that, just like we lost it when we tried to oppose it for the pipelines. Regarding the insurance reserve question, I put in that amendment, and so I do support that, and I think the association can support that because it essentially does nothing. There was an attempt to put in a much more difficult to work with insurance reserve that would deny insurance coverage if counties were zoning in conflict with state law. That was devastating to insurance reserve. So we put in a bill that said, or we put in an amendment that says, if you knowingly are violating the law and it is found by a court by clear and convincing evidence you are violating the law, the insurance reserve has the right to get their coverage back from you personally, which is the state of the law in general. You cannot violate the law and not have consequences, knowingly violate the law. If a county is acting pursuant to their attorney's advice that says we have an ability to litigate this because I don't think this zoning is what PSC intended, that is not a knowing violation of the law. So I'm very comfortable. I know a lot of people, and I know a number of you emailed me on that, but it's not as scary as it looks, is my bottom line. And it was much better than what we were going to get stuck with. And at least that gave us the ability to tell the people who are going to stick us with a bad piece of legislation, do this, it doesn't mean anything, and you get a win, we get a win.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Next, what will the new property classification for the primary residential property look like? Won't that be the same at residential value?
No change on that. It's just an additional marker within our property tax systems. You won't see anything different, no different on how the value is determined, no different on how it shows up on a tax statement. It'll be internal only, and I'm not exactly sure what the purpose is, or if it's just a way. At this point, it is really just a place marker for the future possibility of not having to go through that application process to get the primary residence credit.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Next, are we required to send value information to everyone or just those that have an increase?
Nope, the House Bill 1176 requires a valuation notice showing last year's value and this year's value for every parcel, to every property owner for every parcel.
Okay. How does the assessment notice work if inundated land is reviewed at the township meeting? And also, what happens when a class of property needs to be adjusted as a whole at county board?
I'm not sure if anybody else wants to step in on this one. I feel like that's way over my head. I feel like that is definitely a tax director question. Yeah, that's out of my wheelhouse.
Let's see. Does the 3% cap apply to the voter approved school building fund levy?
Yes. So on initial vote, if a school district currently does not have a building fund levy, which has to be voter approved, that initial implementation or addition of that building levy will go on with no cap, because that's part of that zero. If they're at zero and their voters approve 10 mills for a building fund, those 10 mills can go on year one. Every year after it's been there, the 3% cap applies. The only thing the cap does not apply to regarding schools is a tuition levy, which is levied. It's almost like debt. It's the amount of money that a school district owes another school district for taking their high school kids, or an example like that. And the other exception to school district levies is the safety plan levy. If your school district has a safety plan levy, that levy in 1176 is also accepted out. So again, those details are things we will definitely delve into a bit more at the training on June 16th.
Okay, thanks, Linda. And speaking of June 16th training, a couple questions. Can you go over that again as far as the time? When will registration open? We just have some questions and interest regarding that. So June 16th, where, what time, how do they register?
Jenny, do you want to talk about the registration?
Sure, I can talk about the registration. So the session will be June 16th from 1 to 4:30 p.m. Central Standard Time at Bismarck Career Academy. We are working out the final details on registration and hoping to have that up probably by Monday. To register, there's no fee to register, but we do need to know how many people are coming, because we will have an in-person cap to make sure that we have enough room for everyone. Again, it will be live streamed, and we will also have it recorded. So if you by chance don't make it to the live stream version or in person, you also can request a recording of the training.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Looks like we have about 5 more questions, so we're kind of winding down on questions. We really appreciate you all hanging on tight for this. Next, is there still a legacy fund distribution for highways for 2025 or 2026?
When looking at the legacy earnings distribution, and Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, with the new transportation funding that came through, there's 30% of the legacy earnings after the bond payments are done for the state. There'll be about 175 million that will be going into the DOT highway fund. But I'm not certain about any additional funds from legacy earnings going to counties.
Yeah. My understanding would be that, and I think they're asking specifically about last session, there was a legacy earnings highway tax distribution fund or highway distribution fund, and those were direct allocations. Those are no longer, those are not part of Senate Bill 2012. So there's
Correct.
That's correct. Yep, you're right, Linda.
Okay, thank
They
you.
use the legacy fund earnings to essentially fund that $1,600 property tax credit.
Next question, will we have to send a budget hearing notice for every parcel or just a blanket notice with all entities included?
I think my understanding would be it would be a blanket notice with all political subdivisions included that goes out to every taxpayer. That would be my understanding and interpretation of the language.
I also believe that that was the intent. Just basically the same kind of mailing that we've been doing with the estimated tax notices, but it just removes all the basically false information that was out there about budgets and what taxes were potentially increasing to. And it just provides when the hearings are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just a few left here. Will we be getting a new budget spreadsheet from the state auditor's office to reflect all these budget changes?
That's a great question. And it's not the first time I've been asked that question, and I'll say this in response. The state auditor employee, Heath Erickson, that created and made that budget form no longer works there. So we haven't had any communication with them. I think that's a great ask. I don't know that it would be anything that would be available this budget season regardless. But certainly conversation we should have with state auditor's office.
Okay, down to the final two questions, unless any others slide in. All right, was there any discussion on election portion of the budgets? 2025 is a non-election year. So many of us did not budget much of anything for 2025. Now with an upcoming election year and a 3% cap, this line item alone will likely eat up our 3% available increase.
That's a legit comment. Not the first time I've heard that either. And what I'd say is that is exactly the kind of data that Aaron's saying we need to capture and be able to relay to the legislature next session. And so no, there is no consideration for the fact that most counties didn't budget anything or levy anything additional to cover election expenses in 2025, but you will have that cost in 2026. And that will be part of your general fund calculation, you know, when you're considering total all spending and a 3% cap.
Okay, great comment and question. Thank you. And finally, if we have a voter approved road and bridge levy and we are not using all of it, can we increase to the full amount this year?
Aaron, I'd love your thoughts on this. My initial response is no. The language is very clear that the 3% applies to the previous year's levies. So, and the only exception to that is if you were at zero. But if you haven't utilized levy authority that you had, there's no way to jump to the max from where you're at right now if you're using a portion of it.
I
Again,
said,
it's not, sorry, it's
I
not.
said no, but I was muted.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I said no, but I was muted. If you didn't use it, you lost it unless you're zero.
And I would just say that it's not, again, the 3% cap is on total dollars levied. So it's not on each levy. It's not on each parcel. It's on the total dollars that you're levying. And so I guess that's something also to keep in mind as you're working through this.
Okay. And finally, Linda, if you could just clarify one last time, the county will need to prepare a preliminary budget by August 10th, correct? Hello, hello.
The answer is yes. You will need to have the political subs will need to have a preliminary budget prepared by August 10th. There needs to be and a designated place of where that budget is on file, because that is what will need to be listed on that August notice, that budget hearing notice.
So I just want to follow up on one question, what Danelle just mentioned there too. If caps stay in place next session, I think that does raise a question of what good is even having mill levies to begin with, not in terms of your maximum, but all of the separate mill levies. I think that's a discussion we'll have, but way down the road.
And just some comments and final kind of questions that are rolling in. So a penalty for those counties that kept a lid on their budgets in the past.
Yeah, the answer is all the legislators who voted for caps recognize that there are negatives, and that is one of them. In theory, the ones that were the most conservative limited themselves.
And how does the 3% cap affect the county general if you are not at the 60 mills?
So let's say you're at a general fund of 30 mills and you could have gone up to 60 mills. It doesn't matter. It was use it or lose it in terms of building your baseline budget. So you can't raise your budget 30 mills and then take 3% off of that 60 mills.
Okay. And one last, you're getting some nice comments coming in, and I'll share those with you, our presenters after the webinar. So thank you all. We appreciate that. If the budget is posted, has to be posted to the website, do we still have to have a hard copy for them to view?
I'm not aware, Danelle, please hop in here. I'm not aware of any requirement that says the budget has to be posted to the website. No, nothing changed on budget publications. It is just the budget has to be available somewhere where the public, especially now that we're not, providing estimated notices, someplace that somebody from the public can come in and say before the hearing, I want to see the budget. I want to see what you guys are doing. So it has to be available somewhere. If you make it available on your website, I don't know of a requirement that would require you to have a printed hard copy sitting in the office as well. But I think because some people might not have access to the website, you probably want to have a printed copy in case somebody from the public doesn't have internet and wants to come in and look at the budget and talk to you about it.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think it's written vague, and I know like Linda and I have talked about this as well. It's like, well, are people going to really be wanting to know like X, Y, Z? But the point of changing that from eliminating the estimated tax notices is because legislators realized that was creating a lot of angst with citizens that was unnecessary, and especially prior to this last election where Measure 4 was on the ballot in November, it hyped people up to vote maybe for Measure 4 because they saw what those preliminary budgets were looking like. And so it really is just false information. It's a starting point for those that are doing their budgets. And so that's why they really eliminated that information that's on the estimated tax notices. I know that auditors have pushed back on that estimated tax notice since it was created. And so now it's a shift into something that's different, and I'm sure that change is going to be hard, but really this is more of a vague notice, just letting the public know where and how to weigh in on the budget hearing. You're still going to go through the process of doing your budget work and creating a preliminary budget, a starting point to work from. But that budget hearing notice is simply just to let people know how they can weigh in.
Okay. Presenters, are you okay to stay on for some more questions? Keep rolling in. Is that okay? Or do we need to have questions come in through the evals and address them? However we can do this.
I'm okay with it, but just remember that we are going to get into the very, very weedy area of property tax at our conference coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe focus on those that aren't property tax or 1176 related, so that, because we will be diving into that more in depth later.
Well, I think they probably all are related to that. Maybe let's
Shoot
do
away.
this one. Yeah, let's do it. All right, I love it. Okay, so question reads, I don't really understand the limitation with caps, I guess. If we levied 30 mills last year for general fund, and due to our changes in property valuations, we can get the same dollars for 28 mills. So down in mills, but it's an increase in total dollars received. Does that deal with the caps?
I don't know. If
Right.
are you chiming in?
Yeah, you go ahead, Danelle.
No, I mean, you're the expert. I just didn't hear you pipe in, so I was worried.
Yeah. Yeah, so great question. And I would say your mill rate and your values have nothing to do with the 3% cap on the previous dollars levied. The previous year's dollars levied is what the 3% cap is based on. So regardless of what happens with your values and what that does to your mill rates, you are limited, your spending authority is limited as a county, as an entity in total, to 3% more property tax dollars than the year before. And so, yeah, I can't make it any simpler than that. It's spending authority. It has not, if that means your values went up, your mill rates are going to go down by simple math. That's exactly right. And it doesn't change that spending authority is limited as far as not spending authority, but the levying authority is limited to only 3% more than the previous year total, on the total levy the previous year.
And that's why I said the longer term discussion is what is the point of mills in terms of if you're capped already, it doesn't matter if you had 30 more available, it doesn't matter. So that's the longer term discussion.
Yep.
Okay, looks like you clarified for the individual, so thank you very much. Next question. So the county general could increase more than 3% if you aren't more than 3% overall on dollars levied?
I'm not sure.
I guess I don't understand that
I'm not
question.
sure if I'm following that question.
But if you get, the bottom line is, if your budget based on property tax was $1 million last year, you get 3% of $1 million.
Got it. Okay, individual said got it, so thank you. Is the cap per mill levy or on overall dollars that we levy?
Yep, great question. I'll say it again, and again, this will be really reiterated and probably make more sense when we actually go through the training on the June 16th and actually take a look at those calculations. The 3% is on the total dollars levied regardless. So if you reduce the dollars you're levying in your road and bridge fund, and that, because it gives you some room then in your general fund that you need, you can shift the dollars, but overall total, it cannot be increased by 3% over what you overall total levied the previous year. It can move within the different levying funds, but it can't exceed 3% over the previous year total.
Do we have to make time for all these people asking questions on the budget? We have limited time and staff, or can we just let them view it and tell them to come to the hearing with questions?
Yeah, come to our deal.
But honestly, as an elected official or in your county offices, if somebody comes in through the front door and has a question for you about the budget, or calls you at home as a commissioner and has a question about the budget, however you feel you need to serve your public is how you will answer questions about the budget. I mean, if you're available and the courthouse is open and they want to ask you a question, I don't know how you say, I'm not taking those questions today. Please come back during the budget hearing. But maybe that's how you operate.
Okay. Does the can't exceed the preliminary budget in the final budget still apply? We couldn't go over preliminary appropriations in the final before. Is that still in effect?
Yes, nothing about those pieces of century code and that law has changed. So yes, it still applies.
Or will we not have preliminary budgets and the 3% is the new rule?
No, we still have preliminary budgets and the 3% rule applies.
Who sends out the budget notices?
Danelle, is it the auditor or the treasurer? I believe it's the treasurer.
Okay. Regarding the budget notice, is it just entities that have a budget of over $200,000?
No, again, I think we answered this a little earlier, but that language was repealed in House Bill 1176. So everybody is required to provide their preliminary or their budget hearing notice information or their budget hearing date, time, location, and where their budget is located by August 10th to the county auditor. Unless, like a township, you've already, or a fire district, your voters already voted and approved levies prior to August 10th.
Okay. So will the levy sheet be changing so we know that we are meeting the new guidelines with the caps?
That's also a great question. And I will say that your levy sheets stand alone. Your maximum levy sheets, you are still going to calculate mill levy rates like you have always done in the past. The caps calculation is a separate calculation that lays over the top of all of your levy calculations. And it is truly property tax spending authority. So it doesn't really affect your maximum levy worksheets. Where your maximum levy worksheets come in related to the 3% cap is you are going to have to pull the prior 3 years maximum levy worksheets and pull those dollars off of them or get them in whatever manner you can. You're going to need that to calculate what you're eligible to levy in this, this next coming year. But you're not going to calculate a cap in any way on every single maximum levy worksheet.
Okay. What falls under the county's dollars? Weed board, water board, first district health, county library, etc. Could you clarify?
Yep, county levies would be, for the county auditors out there, this will make sense to you. For everybody else that might be asking, it might not make sense to you, but every county levy authority has a levy number assigned to it. Starts with 12, 1201, 1216, 1233, any 1200 mill levy. This applies to every 1200 level mill levy authority, except the one related to bonds, and except water resource districts, and except the emergency levy. Again, these are weed details that we will be getting into on June 16th.
Okay. And then this individual acknowledges they may not be, it doesn't look like they'll be able to make that June 16th date, so they'll listen later. But what is the difference between the base year levy and adjusted year levy?
Aaron, you want to take a stab at this, or do you want me to?
Both of us can.
I don't want to confuse people.
Here's the bottom line on that. There's not the way it's written is, Linda and I might even have some disagreements on, and we're trying to work through that. But you can just consider your baseline what you did last year. You can adjust it, but again, I don't think that got written the best.
Yeah. So let me explain. There are two calculations. Your base year is the highest dollars levied the previous 3 years. And then increased by 3%. So that's very simple. How many dollars did we levy last year? Add 3% to it, or of the highest of the last 3 years. Example, City of Minot, they cut $5 million out of their general fund. They made a conscientious effort to spend down reserves. So 2 years ago is their highest levy. That would be considered their base year. The adjusted year is the previous year with adjustments that include new property that's come on, property that no longer exists in your county, exemptions that no longer exist. There's 4 different adjustments that get made to that previous year levy, and then that is increased by 3%. So the base year calculation will only probably benefit you if you've made substantial cuts in the last year or two, and you want to get some of those dollars back into your system, your budget calculations. Typically, it will be the previous year levy, which is the year you make the adjustments on.
Okay. And then regarding like the dates of September 7th to October 7th, still the range for those meetings?
Yes, those are still the range for those meetings.
And finally, I think this is it. County levies include health district, vector control, airport, etc. The levying authority extends to all county levied combined, correct?
Correct.
I think we made it. So we're all caught up on questions. I am going to throw it back to Aaron Burst for closing
Yeah, I was
comments.
just going to say thank you all for joining. There'll be more information, not just at that meeting we're coming up on, but throughout the year as we kind of wade through this whole thing. Keep your eye on any of our blogs or our emails that are coming out. I appreciate you all, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
All right, and thanks to all of you, our members, for your continued support and hard work. And as we close this live webinar, a quick evaluation is going to pop up on your screen. Let the legislative team know your comments, thoughts, any training ideas that we need to address in the future. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.